Houston's original neighborhood downtown is for everyone. It's our open-hearted home for our biggest celebrations and our treasured hidden gems. Come explore downtown with some amazing free events through Downtown Houston Plus, like the Summer Trivia Nights at Trebley Park throughout the summer with topics like The Office, Taylor Swift, and more. Learn more at downtownhouston.org. Downtown Houston, get energized and revived. It's hot outside, and you can cool off from the heat with the summer exhibitions at the Contemporary Arts Museum, Houston. Explore the unseen dynamics of Houston's Freedmanstown with the Asher Gates' The Gift and the Reneg. Or visit otherworldly planets and ecosystems with Olivia Erlanger's If Today Were Tomorrow. Admission is always free at the Contemporary Arts Museum, Houston. For more information, visit camh.org. I'll see you at the Contemporary Arts Museum, Houston. Today on CityCast Houston, Pride Month is in full swing with a new parade downtown and more festivals in the suburbs. To continue the celebration, we want to go back to an overlooked chapter in Houston's LGBTQ history. Because nationally, San Francisco and Stonewall in New York City get a lot of attention for the fight for gay rights. But Houston actually was at the center of a movement for radical acceptance through the power of community radio. To learn more, I'm talking with Emily Vinson, an archivist at the University of Houston, and Timmy Martinez with Legacy Community Health. It's Monday, June 24th. I'm Raheel Ramzanali, and here's what Houston's talking about. Emily, Timmy, welcome into CityCast Houston. I am so excited to chat with both y'all. First of all, I just want to let y'all know I am a huge radio junkie. I grew up listening to the radio and I've listened to so many shows. So to hear some of this archival footage has been fascinating to me. We're going to talk about that in a second. Before we talk about the show and everything that's happened here in the city of Houston in terms of its history with the LGBTQ plus community, let's talk about Pride Month. How do y'all like to celebrate, Emily?
Well, I have to be honest. I used to be all for the parades, and they're a little too hot for me now. So I celebrate from a distance, from an air-conditioned space. But I love Houston's Pride. I love how the parades bring out so many people, and just the energy around it all is so exciting. So
it's so much fun. And now with two parades, you have two reasons to skip, right?
Right.
Timmy, how about you?
I'm with you, Emily. As I've gotten older, the heat seems to be wearing me down. So I will be celebrating from a distance with friends. But here at work, I was just putting out some pride beads and pride buttons and pride flags for anyone that wants to take them. It's a whole month of celebration.
It really is. Hey, back in the 1970s and 80s, what was happening in Houston's queer community? Timmy, do you want to start with this one?
So I've done some research. I was not living here at the time, but a lot of it was underground. There was a community, but they really were not being seen at the time until an event that happened in 1977 when Anita Bryant came to town, and she had been leading the charge in Miami-Dade County to repeal anti-discrimination ordinance. And it had gone nationwide. And so the Texas Bar Association invited her to perform at their convention. And that was the moment that brought the queer community all together and came public. They marched on the Hyatt Regency thinking that only a few hundred would show up. And estimates are anything from 5,000 to 10,000 people showed up. But that is what brought the queer community out front and in the public. Kind of Houston's own version of, a Stonewall moment, so to speak.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea. That is so fascinating.
Oh, yeah. It's a really interesting story, especially if you know anything about Anita Bryant, who had been a beauty queen and then was representing the citrus growers in Florida. You had things happening on the East Coast. You had things happening on the West Coast. But what happened here on the Gulf Coast was very much a defining moment.
Do you think Houston and the Gulf Coast now is overlooked in terms of LGBTQ history, Emily?
Oh, I think so. Like you say, we put a lot of emphasis on what was happening on the coast, but big things were happening in Houston, even going back before Anita Bryant, going all the way back to the 60s, before even Stonewall. Rita Wanstrom, who owned a lesbian bar called the Roaring Sixties, she was fighting anti-cross-dressing ordinances that were like really targeting her patrons and trying to shut down the bar. Can you imagine? They had to do all this like fundraising even to get a lawyer. I think throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was lots of legal action being taken by members of the Houston LGBTQ community to fight laws that were discriminatory and targeting their community.
Oh, wow. And now let's talk about After Hours, which was on KPFT, Houston's Pacifica station. This was one of the rare LGBTQ community radio shows. And here's what it sounded like, by the way.
The crew of After Hours is ready to bring you news, interviews, and music geared for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered people. Here at After Hours, we may be diverse, but we have one thing in common. We are all out of the closet and urge everyone to come out of their closets. That means standing up for yourself, taking responsibility for your own life, and being proud of who you are.
I get chills listening to that. Like, it is so fascinating to hear the music, the tone, the descriptions. Emily, tell me, how did the show get started, first of all?
Sure. Well, it actually is part of a bit of a legacy. So KPFT is part of the Pacifica radio network. And going all the way back to 1958, one of their stations, KPFA in Berkeley, broadcast the very first, or what is attributed as the first show that talked about the homosexual experience in the United States. So 1958, really groundbreaking. And then it wasn't until 4 years later that same show aired in New York, and someone at the Pacifica Network there, WBAI, made a show that actually platformed the voices of gay people. It was like a roundtable discussion of gay men talking about the experience of being gay in society. And that sort of inched the door open to this type of community broadcasting. And then here in Houston, the earliest show that was made by and for the gay community was 1972. That's sort of lost to history. Another show came along called Weilenstein that was hosted by Raheel, who's like a really well-known Houston icon and activist in the LGBTQ rights fight. And then starting in 1987, Buddy Johnston, who like very interestingly was a dispatcher for the Houston Police Department, but also open, he started the show. And he really from the very beginning had this community mindset. There's like these little news articles going all the way back to before the show was broadcasting, asking community members to call to let him know if they had community events they wanted publicized, or getting all different perspectives. So starting from 1987 until 2017, the show was on the air, and it really was like an amazing cross-section of Houston. Pretty soon after the show started, Jimmy Carper came on as the show's co-host and producer, and he stayed until he passed away in 2014. And he was so dedicated to bringing in all these different perspectives. So from the 90s, you're hearing the voices of like people who have the Black gay experience, the Hispanic gay experience, all different backgrounds. In the 90s, there's 3 different women who are trans hosts, which obviously, like, we talk about trans visibility now in 2024, but no one was talking about that in the 90s, or maybe not no one, but not sort of mainstream media was talking about that. So it really has an incredible legacy and a huge place in Houston history.
And Timmy, this show provides so much, right? Like, as Emily pointed out, it would lay out the experiences for different minorities, for different people. It provided this service, but what was the overall service that the show provided?
From our history here at Legacy, when the HIV/AIDS pandemic started, the radio show was a source of information where staff from Montrose Clinic, that was our original name, could actually go on air and talk about, hey, if you need HIV testing, this is the process. We promise you privacy. If you need any other type of STD testing, this is the process. I listened to one of the broadcasts and I was really amazed at the amount of information that was given. And I know that if I had been living here at the time, it probably would have made me feel really comfortable about this is where I need to go. This is what I need to do. So the fact that there was a radio show, of course, there was no internet. um, it was either word of mouth, a newspaper, a magazine, or radio, because I seriously doubt that this was being talked about on television.
Hmm. And just to add to what you're saying, I think depending on your life situation and maybe your home situation, even a newspaper or magazine could have some risk associated with it. Someone could find it that maybe you're not ready to have that discussion with. But this radio show, it was very ephemeral, and a lot of people discovered it kind of listening quietly alone, you know, wherever they were. The show broadcast all the way to College Station, so you were catching this huge audience that maybe otherwise didn't have even access to the newspaper, like the alt weeklies. So it really did fill this like special place of reaching people that may had no other way of getting this information.
That's a good point, Emily, because I can imagine someone with a transistor radio and earphone listening to that in the privacy of their own bedroom or something. Let's say you lived at home and you weren't out to your family. You definitely were not going to sit there in the living room with your family and listen to that type of a radio show.
Timmy, I'm glad you brought up that clip. We actually want to play that for our listeners because you have to hear just how informative some of these segments were.
Hi, this is Mike Leone. Tonight I'm going to continue my series on the Montrose Clinic by talking about one of the two clinics that form part of the Montrose Clinic. This is the Clinic for Sexually Transmitted Diseases, or STDs. There are 3 major STDs that the clinic mostly deals with.
I absolutely love the music. I love that they didn't retrack anything. It's just so raw. It's just so natural. It's so fascinating. Again, I'm going to keep using that word because I love listening to old radio shows, and this is just so cool. And that was one of the programs featuring the Montrose Clinic, which is now known as Legacy Community Health. And there were other programs that talk about HIV education workshops, outreach to different groups within the gay community, and much more. How important was the health guidance the clinic shared, especially during the AIDS crisis? And as you mentioned, Timmy, that look, there was no internet. How important was this?
I grew up in Fort Worth, moved here in 92, but I have friends that were here during the worst of times. And what they have told me, they were reaching for any type of information, some of it good, some of it bad. One of my friends, he no longer is with us, but Monty Frost, he was a philanthropist, and he would go to Europe to do clinical trials, things that were not available here, then come back and have little group sessions to tell his friends, because, in the early days, there was no treatment. It was, you get tested, and if you tested positive, then what the staff at Montrose Clinic would do was help you pretty much get your affairs in order, maybe help you come out to your family, maybe not. It was a really tough time. And I'm fortunate that I have friends here that have been able to pass on these stories, because I don't know that that they're archived anywhere or written down. So that's why I think having the radio show to be a conduit for valid information was good, because like I said, people told me they were grasping at anything.
Prevention was also a big theme on the radio show, talking to each other about the experience. How many lives do you think were saved because of the radio show?
I would guess thousands. I mean, I don't know. Emily, do you have...
I don't think I could guess, but I know the show by the 90s was reaching about 8,000 or 9,000 people. Of course, some of those people might have been finding information in other ways, but I think even beyond just like the really valuable health information, they were less alone because they had sort of this friend on the air talking about their experience, because quite a few of the different hosts over the years were HIV positive or were talking about their own experience of like going regularly to the Montrose Clinic to be tested. They maybe didn't know these radio personalities, but they felt, I would imagine, a connection to these people. I feel a connection to these people after listening to them for so many hours. Not only were they providing super valuable health information, but information about resources if they were positive, information about other access to nonprofits that could help them, and then just like someone living the same experience, which I think is also extremely valuable.
If I can add something to Emily, you're right. There was a community a community within a community, people who were HIV positive that, found support groups, people who needed testing. I don't know if y'all are aware of this or not, but Montrose Clinic was the first private agency, non-governmental agency in Houston and in Texas to offer the test, second in the nation. But another little piece of Houston history that a lot of people don't know. And again, it had to do with privacy because there was no HIPAA. People were worried, even with STD testing, people were worried that somehow their employer might find out or members of their family that they had not told yet.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, CEO of CityCast, or, as I can say now, thanks to a few weeks with Babbel, hola, soy David Plotz, el jefe de CityCast. What if in 2024 you got a little bit better every day? When you're learning a new language with Babbel, that's exactly what you're doing. And if Babbel can help me start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks, imagine what you could do in a full year. I got started with Babbel because I realized that my girlfriend, who's a native Spanish speaker, and my son, who's in AP Spanish, were conspiring against me, or thought they were conspiring against me in Spanish. I wanted to know what they were talking about. And now, thanks to literally just a few weeks of Babbel, I'm starting to be able to eavesdrop. It is rare that something so fun and simple, and Babbel is super fun and very simple, is also so useful. So here's a special limited time deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Welcome to the Flash Finds podcast, the world's fastest podcast where we explore how Facebook can help you with the stuff you're into. I'm Emma Rogue, joined by Nathan the Cat Lady, a Facebook creator. So Nathan, if you're into pets, what kind of stuff can you find on Facebook?
Well, I make reels about useful tips for pet owners. For instance, cats don't like still water, so all of my cats have cat fountains.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute. What a great episode. See you next time on the Flash Finds podcast, all about discovering the stuff on Facebook you care about. Bye.
Emily, how did you decide to archive these shows, by the way? Because this is such a big part of history, but often forgotten.
There were a couple factors that motivated it. First, it was like just such an amazing, rich and impactful history and documents Houston in such a unique way and really vital. Like you think about how important Montrose is to the city and how important LGBTQ history is to the city, but it is a bit ephemeral, especially as a radio show. That was a big factor, the historical value, the research value of it. But then also a major consideration is these recordings are all on open reel tape, cassette tape, even VHS. And the enemy of magnetic media like that is heat and humidity. And here we are in Houston. And these were all in the custody of these amazing project partners, Judy Reeves, JD Doyle, and Russell Bird. And some of them were stored in like storage lockers. And you can just imagine there's a tremendous risk that if we didn't digitize them now, we would lose them forever. They're all one of a kind recordings. There are no, cloud backups of tape, of course. And like, what a tremendous loss if we didn't if we didn't digitize them now. And because they were just in the custody of community members and community archivists, they weren't available to researchers, and now they're available all over the world. So anyone who's interested maybe in LGBTQ medical history can find these recordings and can look through them and find out how education methods were being conducted in 1988.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of reasons, but the main one really was an urgency because of the fragile nature of the media and, of course, the content.
How many hours did y'all archive?
A little over 3,600 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big project.
How much of that did you listen to?
And a tremendous amount.
Oh my gosh.
So it's all transcribed. So we had a fairly hands-on process because we used AI generated transcripts, but we would go back and correct them because, as anyone who's ever used an AI transcript system knows, they get things really, really wrong. So I have personally listened to truly a tremendous amount, but it's been a joy.
Absolutely, right? Like, and you've gotten a chance to listen to history that feature protests to pride parades, unfortunately, the AIDS crisis, the fight for gay rights. What stood out to you as you went through that process of listening to thousands of hours of Houston's LGBTQ history?
I think I've gained a tremendous appreciation for some of the music. There was a show, J.D. Doyle had a show, Queer Music Heritage. And so there's like amazing music that really featured LGBTQ artists. So that was like really fun, of course. You get a feel for how like tight and connected the community was. So people pop up time and again, and you recognize a name from here, and then you see it over there. Yeah. So you get to kind of know people. And then I think the most surprising thing for me, nowadays we talk about parasocial relationships, where we sort of like feel like we know maybe like a social media influencer or something. But like I sort of feel like I have that with these radio personalities. You listen to enough hours of someone and you feel this really deep affection for them. When we were talking about the AIDS crisis, for example, several of the hosts over the years did pass away from AIDS. And you feel, even though this happened 20 or 30 years ago, as a listener today, I feel this sort of deep loss because they were very young, and you wonder what their life would have been if they'd had access to better medical care or preventative measures. And so I think it brings home just the profound loss of the AIDS epidemic as well.
Oh, that is so heartbreaking to hear. And it's a reality we have to face, right? Like that's the history of what we've gone through as a community. And it's just heartbreaking. But I want to go back to the people who would be on these shows, right? And as y'all both have mentioned, this is going on in the 80s, late 80s, 90s, and it's not as mainstream. How brave did people have to be to appear on the show and use their names, Timmy?
Definitely, it was coming out of the closet. If you weren't already out, this was a definite step, actually 5 steps probably, to have the courage to be able to do this. But I think it was also to help people and for the betterment of the community, finding it deep within yourself to say, hey, I'm going to go on air and I'm going to talk about this.
Emily, was there any pushback from the greater Houston community with this radio show?
I wouldn't say the greater Houston community. I think outlying individuals maybe, but for sure they received death threats. There were people who would call in, and I think there were probably screeners who would talk to the call-in folks ahead of time, and they would get past the screener by sort of claiming to be one type of caller. And then it was a live show, as you mentioned, very raw. So then they would harass the hosts, but man, the hosts gave as well as they got. So they were fearless and they did not care what any of these callers thought of them. And also they could hang up on them, which I think was helpful. So yeah, it was tremendously brave, and really the range of vulnerability and personal information they were willing to give. As I mentioned, there were a couple different trans hosts who came on, and even in the mid 90s, they were describing in great detail, down to the names of their doctors, what the process of transitioning. I mean, a radical move, I think, for the 90s.
Wow. That would be a radical move now, Emily.
Yeah. And what an incredible service to someone. I think there's even in one of the hosts, I believe Sarah De Palma's obituary, someone from Galveston is like, I didn't even know this existed until this show came along, that this was an option that was available. So, yeah, incredible bravery. It astounds me.
Yeah, incredible bravery for sure, whether it be from the callers, sharing information from the hosts. Timmy, what do you think the long-term impact of these shows will be or already have been?
I hope that people respect the legacy of the host, the guest on the show, that provided information, put themselves out there. I hope that people much younger than me will respect and honor the history of this radio show. I think sometimes to move forward, you need to look back and realize the limitations that were available. You know, like we said earlier, this was a radio show. It was mass communication, but nothing like what we have right now. And I'm really glad that these shows are archived, because I'm definitely going to go back and listen to a few of them.
Final question for both of y'all. We've been talking about preserving Houston's LGBTQ history, but what do you think all of this means for the current state of affairs and well-being for the queer community in Houston and in Texas as a whole? Timmy?
I hope that people realize the fight still isn't over. When I look back on things that happened in the 70s and the 80s, this was a group of people who really fought to get to where we are today. And sometimes I worry that the LGBT community that were under attack again, for every step we take forward, there are people trying to push us back 2 or 3 steps. And what's important is that those of us who are members of the LGBT community and our allies, because without our allies, we can't fight the fight. But I think that we need to stick together, stay together, and embrace every segment of the LGBT community.
Emily?
I'm an archivist, so I have an archivisty answer. But I think that there's just a tremendous value in knowing your own history and knowing where you came from. And I say, your own history, but it doesn't matter if you're not from Houston. It doesn't matter if you weren't raised here. I think anyone coming into these recordings can learn a lot about the long arc of history and this long process of fighting for civil rights that's really very well documented in these recordings, because there's lots of political organizing, lots of voter turnout, that kind of thing. So I think anyone who explores these recordings will come away with, a different perspective and insights into that unique history. And I think what it means today will kind of be up to the listener, but I think that there's a lot to learn from the recordings.
Absolutely. A lot to learn from the history, and hopefully we can apply some of these lessons to the future. Emily, Timmy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Emily Vinson, who has archived over 3,000 hours of LGBTQ community radio at the University of Houston, and Timmy Martinez, Vice President for Major Gifts and Planned Giving at Legacy Community Health. You can listen to these archived radio programs with a link in our show notes. And if you like this episode, please share it on social media, and don't forget to hit subscribe. That will do it for today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new. Excuse me 1 second. 3, 2, 1.